The Falkland Islands War was a 10-week conflict between Argentina and the United Kingdom from April 2nd to June 14th, 1982. It was fought over the sovereignty of the Falkland Islands, South Georgia, and the South Sandwich Islands in the South Atlantic Ocean. The conflict was a significant event in the late 20th century, not only because of its impact on the two nations involved, but also due to its broader geopolitical implications during the Cold War era. Argentina and Britain have been at odds over the Falkland Islands for centuries. The British settled the islands in 1765, but British and Spanish forces later abandoned and repeatedly reoccupied them. Argentina claimed the islands as part of its territory after gaining independence from Spain in 1816, citing historical ties and proximity. But in 1833, the British reclaimed the Falklands and drove out the Argentine government that had taken up residence there. Since then, the islands have been under British control, although Argentina has never relinquished its claim. The Falkland Islands, despite their remote location, held significant strategic importance. Situated roughly 8,000 miles from the United Kingdom and 300 miles off the coast of Argentina, the islands were a crucial point of contention. Their strategic significance, far outweighing their financial value, made them highly significant symbols of pride and sovereignty for both countries. Argentine forces invaded the Falkland Islands on April 2, 1982. A naval task force comprising the aircraft carrier ARA 25 de Mayo, multiple destroyers and amphibious landing ships participated in the operation, which was codenamed Operation Rosario. The small British garrison on the islands was overrun by Argentine Marines and special forces that landed at various locations. Following a brief period of resistance, Rex Hunt, the British governor of the Falklands, surrendered, and Argentina took control of the islands. The invasion surprised the British government. The British had not anticipated a full-scale invasion despite some intelligence suggesting Argentina might be preparing a military operation. The Thatcher administration started preparing for a military response when it denounced the invasion. Resolution 502, passed by the UN Security Council, demanded that Argentine forces leave the islands and that hostilities end immediately. However, the stage was set for a military conflict when Argentina refused to comply. In response to the invasion, the British government acted with swift determination. Prime Minister Thatcher approved the creation of a naval task force to retake the Falklands. Under the command of Rear Admiral John Sandy Woodward, the task force comprised amphibious assault ships, support vessels, multiple destroyers and frigates, and 2 aircraft carriers, HMS Hermes and HMS Invincible. A contingent of paratroopers, Royal Marines, and other ground forces were also part of the task force. The British government also sought and received diplomatic support from important allies, including the United States. 3 days after the Argentine invasion, on April 5, 1982, the British task force sailed for the South Atlantic. During the weeks-long journey to the Falklands, the British government made a concerted diplomatic effort to increase international support for its position. Under President Ronald Reagan, the United States tried to mediate a peaceful resolution. When it became evident that Argentina would not leave the islands, the United States turned its support to the United Kingdom, giving it access to military hardware, intelligence, and logistical support. This international support bolstered the UK's position and showed the international community's unity in the face of aggression. The recapture of South Georgia, a remote island roughly 800 miles east of the Falklands, on April 25, 1982, marked the first British military action in the conflict. A small force of Royal Marines and Special Air Service soldiers participated in the operation, which was codenamed Operation Parakeet. The frigate HMS Plymouth and the destroyer HMS Antrim provided support. The Argentine garrison in South Georgia gave up without a fight, and the British forces, with their bravery and determination, faced minimal opposition. The British were significantly boosted in morale by the recapture of South Georgia, which also showed that they could project military might over great distances. The Argentine airfield at Stanley, the Falklands capital, was the target of a series of airstrikes by the British on May 1, 1982. Operation Black Buck 1, a long-range bombing mission conducted by a Vulcan bomber from Ascension Island, which is more than 3,800 miles from the Falklands, was the most well-known of these strikes. Several in-flight refuelings were necessary for the mission, one of the longest-range bombing raids in history. The Stanley airfield was severely damaged, and Argentine air operations were disrupted when the Vulcan dropped 21 1,000-pound bombs on it. Black Buck 1's success demonstrated the Royal Air Force's reach and capability, which also dealt the Argentine forces a severe psychological blow. The British launched a series of air and naval attacks on Argentine positions in the Falklands on the same day as the Black Buck 1 raid. The destroyer HMS Glamorgan and the frigate HMS Alacrity carried out naval bombardments of Argentine positions. At the same time, the British aircraft carriers HMS Hermes and HMS Invincible launched Harrier jump jets to attack Argentine airfields and radar installations. To cut off Argentine supply lines and stop reinforcements from getting to the islands, the British also established a naval blockade around the Falklands. The threat posed by British submarines, especially the nuclear-powered HMS Conqueror, which sank the Argentine cruiser ARA General Belgrano on May 2, 1982, also limited the size of the Argentine Navy's surface fleet. A contentious act that greatly intensified the conflict was the sinking of the Belgrano, which claimed the lives of 323 Argentine sailors. Because the Belgrano was outside the exclusion zone but still posed a threat to British forces, the British government claimed it was a legitimate military target. Life in the Falkland Islands was hazardous and challenging for the armed forces and the civilian population during the war. The 1,800 or so inhabitants of the islands, the majority of whom were of British ancestry, were enmeshed in a conflict over which they had little control. Despite the curfews, travel restrictions, and the presence of Argentine troops in both the towns and the countryside, the Falkland Islanders showed remarkable resilience in the face of severe disruptions to their day-to-day life. The Argentine invasion swiftly overran the British military forces on the islands, including the Falkland Islands Defence Force and the Royal Marines. Some British soldiers, however, avoided capture and went into hiding where the locals helped them. These soldiers were crucial to the eventual liberation of the islands and gave the British task force invaluable intelligence. The British military started preparing an amphibious assault on the Falklands as the task force drew closer. As part of the plan, codenamed Operation Sutton, British troops were to land at San Carlos Bay on the western side of East Falkland. The British forces that participated in the landing included the Parachute Regiment and the 3 Commando Brigade of the Royal Marines, supported by artillery, engineers, and logistics units. The task force's frigates and destroyers supplied air defense and naval gunfire support, while the landing ships HMS Fearless and HMS Intrepid transported the troops and supplies required for the attack. Codenamed D-Day, the British amphibious landing at San Carlos Bay started on May 21, 1982. During the landing, which took place in the dark, the British forces secured the surrounding high ground and established a beachhead at San Carlos. The landing was mainly unopposed since the Argentine troops gathered around Stanley and other strategic points. However, the Argentine Air Force soon targeted the landing ships and supply vessels in what became known as Bomb Alley. The Argentine pilots, flying low to avoid radar detection, launched a series of audacious attacks on the British ships using bombs, rockets, and Exocet missiles. Soon after, the British forces were under heavy air attack. Despite having Sea Harrier fighters and anti-aircraft guns, the British ships found it difficult to repel the Argentine airstrikes. The British task force suffered severe damage as a result of the Argentine air attacks, with multiple ships struck and some sunk. Most notably, Argentine bombs sank the frigates HMS Ardent and HMS Antelope, as well as the destroyer HMS Coventry. Notwithstanding these setbacks, the British forces were able to forge a safe beachhead at San Carlos and started to advance inland in the direction of Stanley. Argentina's National Day and the anniversary of the May Revolution of 1810 made May 25, 1982, a pivotal day in the Falklands War. To cause the most significant damage to the British ships, the Argentine Air Force launched a significant air attack on the British task force. One of the biggest and best-planned airstrikes of the war, the attack involved more than 50 aircraft. In addition to the landing ships and supply vessels in San Carlos Bay, the Argentine pilots targeted the British aircraft carriers HMS Hermes and HMS Invincible, the container ship MV Atlantic Conveyor, and the destroyer HMS Coventry, which were transporting essential supplies and equipment for the British forces, were sunk as a result of the attack. The British suffered a serious setback. Even though the Argentine air attacks were successful, the British task force could repel them and continue the operation. The British Sea Harrier fighters did well in air-to-air combat, taking down several Argentine aircraft and forcing others to abandon their missions. Goose Green, a small settlement on East Falkland, was the scene of one of the land campaign's pivotal battles. The 2nd Battalion of the Parachute Regiment, known as Tupere, attacked Argentine positions at Goose Green on May 28, 1982. Both sides suffered significant losses in the hotly contested battle. Ultimately, the British won, securing the settlement and apprehending more than 1,000 Argentine soldiers. The British forces' victory at Goose Green showed they could overcome well-established Argentine defenses and boosted morale significantly. The arrival of the 5th Infantry Brigade, which was shipped to the Falklands on the cruise ship SS Canberra, strengthened the British forces as they pressed forward on Stanley. The brigade comprised the 1st Battalion of the Welsh Guards and the 2nd Battalion of Scots Guards, which was instrumental in the campaign's closing phases. The British could keep up their momentum and exert more pressure on the Argentine forces defending Stanley after 5th Brigade arrived. They prepared for the attack on the capital as the British forces drew closer to Stanley. The British troops had a clear attack strategy and were well prepared and stocked. However, with their supply lines cut off and their positions constantly under attack, the Argentine forces were under pressure and growing increasingly demoralized. On June 11, 1982, the British forces launched a series of coordinated attacks on Argentine positions surrounding the capital, starting the final battle for Stanley. With the help of artillery and naval fire, the British forces overran the Argentine defenses as they moved in on Stanley from several angles. Even though they fought fiercely, the Argentine troops could not stop the British advance. By June 14, 1982, the British forces had encircled Stanley and were getting ready to launch a last attack on the capital. General Mario Menendez, the Argentine commander, agreed to surrender after realizing that more resistance was pointless. Both Argentine and British representatives signed a formal surrender document, and the Argentine forces on the Falklands surrendered. After the war, the British regained control of the Falkland Islands. The surrender of the Argentine forces on June 14, 1982, marked the end of the Falklands War. After seizing Stanley, the British military started to rebuild the islands and restore order. Following the repatriation of the Argentine POWs, the British government began making plans for the Falklands' long-term development and defense. 3 Falkland Islanders, 255 British soldiers, and 649 Argentine soldiers lost their lives in the Falkland Islands War. Both Argentina and the United Kingdom experienced significant political repercussions from the conflict. The defeat of the Falklands War had a significant effect on Argentina. The invasion's failure damaged the military junta's credibility, as it had hoped to use the conflict to strengthen its position. Argentina made the democratic transition in 1983, and Raúl Alfonsín was elected president. The Malvinas became a rallying cry for future generations and a symbol of Argentine pride due to the war's long-lasting effects on the country's culture. The triumph in the Falklands War significantly increased Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher's and the Conservative government's popularity in the United Kingdom. During economic hardship, the successful military campaign re-established national pride and was considered an example of British strength and resolve. The war also strengthened the United Kingdom's resolve to hold on to its overseas territories and position as a significant world power. The UK has kept a military presence on the Falkland Islands to ward off any future Argentine aggression, and the islands have remained under British rule since the end of the war. significant economic growth has also occurred on the islands, especially in offshore oil exploration and fishing. The Falkland Islanders have repeatedly stated their wish to continue being a British overseas territory, and in a 2013 referendum, 99.8% of voters made this decision. However, Argentina hasn't given up on its claim to the islands, and the two countries are still at odds over sovereignty. Although the Falklands War is still a source of pride and identity for Argentina and the UK, it is still a touchy subject in both nations. Argentina and the United Kingdom suffered greatly due to the short but fierce Falkland Islands War. Despite being fought over a far-flung and sparsely populated region, the conflict significantly impacted international relations, political legitimacy, and national identity. The war made apparent how crucial military readiness is, how difficult it is to project power over great distances, and how ineffective diplomacy is at settling territorial disputes. The Falklands War still shapes Argentina's and the UK's politics and identities, and the islands continue to represent the ongoing hostilities between the two countries.